So a little over 6 weeks since the election, and the MP class of 2015 is ready for action. What to expect? Andrew is here in Toronto. Chantel is in Ottawa, and so is the Huffington Post's Althea Raj. Let me first show you a sense of how the three major party leaders see the road ahead. This from the House of Commons this afternoon.
We will work hard to promote more openness across government. We will give Canadians and all members a voice in Ottawa and in this chamber. This also means greater independence of committees, reforming question period, and more free votes.
I would like to say to the Prime Minister, through you, Mr. Speaker, that when it's in the best interests of Canadians, he too can count on our cooperation and support. And Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister is wondering what I'm prepared to do when he does not act in the best interests of Canadians, to him I say, just watch me.
I remember when Jack Layton made me his House Leader, he said that we were going to take an undertaking. We will make an undertaking never to heckle the way it had been done in the past. And a lot of the journalists laughed and said that'll last about 3 days. But you know what? It lasted the whole Parliament. The NDP will back you on that, and we'll be there with you every step of the way.
Well, Tom Mulcair referring to the new Speaker, Jeff Regan's suggestion that he wanted to end heckling, that he was against heckling, he didn't want to see any more heckling. Really? Can this happen? Andrew?
There was some skepticism you heard in the House there as to whether or not the NDP had been quite as pure on this issue as Mr. Mulcair pretended. I wouldn't want to see it eliminated altogether. Like anything else, heckling can be dumb and pointless, or it can be witty and on point. It's one of the rare things of actual spontaneity in the House. Much of what is worst about Parliament happens in the prepared remarks, in the staged questions, and the equally stagey answers. Sure, let's prune the excessive, but I wouldn't want to see it eliminated.
Chantal?
I don't think you can eliminate it altogether, but it does become a kind of a weapon. It's used mostly against women, to tell you the truth. Women who have smaller voices. Chrystia Freeland can talk about this. Anne McLellan, when she was there, the former Chrétien minister, that at some point it became a kind of a game that when these women stood up, you would drown them out with strong male voices. Stéphane Dion could speak to that when he was defending the Clarity Act. He got his seat moved because the Bloc Québécois was heckling him to the point where he could not get a word out.
All right. I want to try and get a sense of the challenges ahead for each of the three leaders. But first of all, I want to start with a sense of how they appeared today in the House of Commons. Althea, you were in there in the press gallery looking down at the various members of Parliament and focusing, I guess, on the leaders. In terms of body language, did anything strike you watching that scene?
Yeah, I mean, we had Trudeau and Rona Ambrose in the middle of the House where their seats are, but talking to one another, and people from all parties were coming up to them. And Mr. Mulcair was kind of far on his own corner, and he waited for people to come to him. In fact, Mr. Trudeau had to go over to Mr. Mulcair. He didn't really move from his spot. And the other thing that struck me was that we actually saw Stephen Harper in the House. He wasn't there to listen to the speakers who were running for the election speak, but he showed up to vote and then very quickly left. So it was at least interesting to see him there. I think he knows that perhaps his party, he's no longer as welcome on those benches as perhaps he used to be.
All right, let's break it down a bit. And let's start actually with Tom Mulcair first, because he's the person we've seen the least in the last 6 weeks or so, and lots of questions being raised about his future, and he being firm about he's there and through and into the next election. What are the immediate challenges facing Tom Mulcair, who's probably had a lot of self-reflection over these past 6 weeks, given the results in the election? What's the immediate challenge for him, Chantal?
I'm guessing to psych himself up for that second fiddle job in opposition. When he hoped to be across the aisle, you can call yourself the progressive opposition to distinguish yourself from the Conservatives, but at the end of the day, you are still number three. And it showed in what Althea is describing kind of speaks to that. It's one thing to know it, it's another thing to live it. He also has to focus the NDP on battles that are within their comfort zone. I think the trade deal, the Trans-Pacific trade deal fits that bill. Long term, this is a party that has to be taking the Liberals' feet to the fire on electoral reform unless it wants to repeat its history of hoping to come through and kill the Liberals and then falling back to where they are today.
Andrew?
Short term, the challenges aren't so great for him. I think it's longer term, and that is holding on to his job. This was a calamitous election campaign for the NDP. They went from close to 40% to less than 20% at the end. They had the wrong strategy. They had a leader who didn't really connect with people. And the whole enterprise on which he was hired was that they were going to move to the middle and assume power. And it didn't happen that way. And they now have a party in the Liberals who are intent, it seems, on occupying a great deal of that left of center space that they essentially vacated for them by trying to move to the middle. So I think you had a lot of New Democrats who were not happy with that campaign, both strategically and just, you know, in terms of where the party was placed. They're going to give them the benefit of the doubt in the short term, but there's a leadership review in the spring. I don't think anybody wants to move to a leadership challenge right away, but I'd be astonished if he leads the party into the next election.
Leaders usually get in trouble when they're sniping out and about within the party, public sniping. I don't think we've seen any of that yet, as you suggest, Andrew. Althea?
No, we haven't heard it, actually. In some ways, I wonder if some people are just holding back their fire, hoping that Mr. Mulcair kind of reads the tea leaves and takes the Christmas break to rethink his strategy. What we're hearing from him and what we're hearing from the people around him is he still intends to fight that 2019 election. He'll be 64 years old. He actually seems like he has lost all the fire in his belly. He had a press conference this week. He talked about his priorities, which were essentially just holding the Liberals' feet to the fire on things like, she mentioned childcare, but he talked about healthcare and the environment. He didn't mention anything, remotely controversial, like TPP, like electoral reform, like C-51, like deficits. It almost was more like a caretaker position that he was putting forward. So I'm not convinced that he actually is going to stay.
I'm not convinced that he actually means to lead the party in the next election either. He may be saying that, but I too would be really surprised to see him there, and I'm not sure that there's a path from here to there within the party.
What about the Conservatives? How should we look at that situation? Rona Ambrose is not going to run if she follows the rules of the party. She can't as interim leader. So in terms of the challenges for that party, the immediate ones, what are they, Andrew?
Well, they got to take their time, first of all. There's no need to rush into a leadership race. It looks like they're going to take a year or two to do it. That's fine, because they need to rethink a lot of things about where the party stands and how it approaches politics. As I've said many times, the nastiness that we associate with the Harper Conservatives came out of a policy void. It was the fact that they had decided they weren't going to be open and transparent about what their agenda was with people, because they didn't think they could sell it. And as a result, I think they left a lot of Conservatives quite at odds with where did this party stand, where was it going. So they need to go back to basics. They need to figure out why they want to be a party, what they would do with power if they had it. Once they can go back to that kind of sort of searching self-examination, then they're better placed to think about, okay, who would be best placed to lead this party in the next election. Of course, they've also got to be very mindful that if we do change the electoral system, that changes everything. And that changes the strategic calculations, and it changes the kind of leader that you would want to choose. So that's one reason why they want to wait and see what, if any, reform comes out of the process the Liberals are about to kick off.
Althea?
Yeah, in some ways, the Liberals have given the Conservatives a giant favor by moving to the left. They've created all this space that the Conservatives, in terms of policy, can really occupy. They can press them on, their deficits and fiscal situation. They can press them on international affairs and security, things that even blue Liberals feel like their own party doesn't speak for them on. So I think that there's almost only good news in the short term for the Conservative Party. The bad news is a lot of people on the reform side are very worried that there's going to be a Peter MacKay, Brian Mulroney retake over of the party, and that the sort of reform candidates are going to split the vote, and it's going to be a nasty family battle. But in terms of Parliament work, I think so far what we've seen from Rona Ambrose has been very positive, and everyone's uniting behind it.
Sounds like that could be a really exciting leadership race.
Well, if we've learned anything from the past 4 years or the years before that, it's that Parliament is not the stage upon which the fate of the Conservative Party will play out. If that were the case, Thomas Mulcair would have been walking into the House of Commons as Prime Minister today. I agree with Andrew. There may be a lot of space for the Conservatives to occupy, but they have not been occupying it. And moreover, about 6 out of 10 voters have now made it a priority rather than a consideration that they don't want them back. And that is going to weigh heavily, electoral reform or not, unless this party decides that it wants to make itself attractive to more voters rather than make as many of those who don't actually think like them angry, they could be in opposition for a long time regardless of who the leader is. And a reminder, the cycle usually is 10 years in, 10 years out.
Can I interject on that? I actually think that so far what we've seen the Conservatives have been very collaborative. They could have attacked the government on, going beyond their deadline on the Syrian refugee crisis, but they didn't. In fact, we had Chris Alexander, the former immigration minister, congratulate people on Twitter about this decision. Like on so many policy fronts, we've actually seen them sort of hand over an olive branch to the Liberals in a way that we never, a year ago, that would not have happened.
All right. We obviously have to touch on the government. No party faces more challenges in a normal situation than the governing party because they got to govern. So give me the one challenge you think is the greatest that the Liberals face in the short term. Andrew.
Managing expectations. They have made so many commitments, more than 300 in that platform. They have, a lot of them they didn't really think through necessarily terribly well. A lot of them were just to differentiate themselves from the other parties, like running the deficits, like pulling out of the ISIS mission. And some of these things are already starting to cause them troubles. They are already looking at deficit numbers that are different than they were planning on. They've had to backtrack on the refugee schedule. And they've got to be careful that they don't, disappoint people too greatly, that they don't go back on too many promises. And they're going to need to sort of pick and choose their priorities rather than thinking they can do all, push all 320 commitments through the same silo.
I love that. Ask for one challenge. She gives us all of them under one umbrella. Chantel, give me the one challenge.
Big picture.
Well, no, I'm going to go where Andrew went. I think agenda overload is going to be a part of the issue. It's one thing to say, for instance, we're going to do more on climate change, but there's a lot of heavy lifting. It's not called an ambitious policy agenda because it's easy to accomplish. And if you're trying to move in every direction at the same time, with little control over your economic circumstances, which is the case of this government, and a kind of a base missing. This is a government that has promised much, but does not promise to do much to make the federal government have more revenues to accomplish all this. It's going to come back to haunt them. So I guess the fiscal situation would be one of my top challenges, but agenda overload for sure.
All right, I got to take a break, but Althea, you give me your major challenge you see for the government.
I would say managing expectations. I think in some ways people are going to give the government kind of a carte blanche, at least till after they table their budget. But a lot of people voted for the Liberals because, this was a first-time voter. They thought that Justin Trudeau represented something. He was kind of an empty slate, and they projected their hopes and aspirations against them. And then when we had incidents like this week with the nannies, a lot of Liberals who volunteered on campaigns were shocked. And when you allow your, people's projections and their expectations to kind of not be met, I think a lot of their wounds might actually end up just being self-inflicted.
All right, we got to take that break I was talking about, but when we come back, have you ever heard an admission like this before?
There was a lot of guessing and speculation going on, and to be quite blunt, we got a lot of it wrong.
So, is that an indication of the new Ottawa? At Issue continues in a moment. Time to check the day's business numbers. The TSX dropped 139 points. The loonie went up slightly. The Dow lost 252 points. The price of oil closed up $1.14 a barrel. And welcome back. Rex, by the way, is off tonight. He will be back next week. Andrew, Chantel, and Althea are still here. So the Navy admits it really misled everyone on the costs of new warships. What should we make of that? And if you missed it just before that break, watch this again. Here was the admission by a Vice Admiral, no less. Watch.
There was a lot of guessing and speculation going on. And to be quite blunt, we got a lot of it wrong.
Vice Admiral Mark Norman of the Royal Canadian Navy. The whole debate around procurement is an interesting and important one. Those are huge dollars that the various arms of the military spend. But I just found it really quite stunning to watch that kind of admission, and I wonder whether it tells us something about the role public servants will play under the new government, as opposed to what we witnessed over the last 10 years, where they're basically, it's hard to imagine that having been said a year ago. Chantal?
Yes, because a year ago he would have been talking about something that has happened on the watch the government in power. So I'm guessing that the test of that is whether in 3 years someone like that says something like that, and whether the government can live with that. Because today it's easy enough to say over the watch of the previous government, this happened. The Liberals are certainly going to be comfortable with it. So let's see how long that keeps up.
There's been every indication from the Liberals that they encourage that kind of blunt talk. But as you say, in 3 years or even 3 months, let's see. Althea, what do you make of it?
I agree entirely with Chantal on this. D&D traditionally has been more vocal than other departments, even under the Stephen Harper government, but not to the point where they would come out and admit that they had made an error, like on the F-35s, for example. So I don't know if this was sanctioned by the Prime Minister's office or if they were even just given a sort of a courtesy heads up. But we did see them encourage, for example, the ambassadors to go out and talk to people, to the media, and I'm sure they're very happy that the Vice Admiral put the blame squarely on the former government. But I agree. I mean, will they do that in 6 months? I don't know.
Andrew?
I'm not sure he had a lot of options, frankly, given the story. I mean, he didn't call a press conference beforehand to tell everybody about this proactively. He was responding to a story that came out in CBC and elsewhere. And it is on a grand scale. I mean, we've had a string of procurement disasters, but this one perhaps beats all of them. And it does rather raise the question, if he is being so frank about we got it wrong, why we don't, instead of running procurement as a sheltered workshop for innumerate bureaucrats and spendthrift companies, why we don't farm it out to countries with, competent military industrial complexes.
If there was a pattern of a new openness and a new admission on the part of public servants working, for the government of the day, what would you expect to see? Go ahead.
I would expect them. I wouldn't expect them to have interviews or news conferences to say we just blew this. I would expect them, though, to lay out the choices, be in front of governments and departments more clearly, moving forward, and so that people are aware that the magic solution is not necessarily at hand. You have to make choices, and they know in what context those choices are made.
You get the last word, Andrew.
Well, part of it also is having a proper system of accounts, and what we've seen in the past is the department itself is running, in a sense, blind. They're not operating off of a properly constructed set of books. They keep getting called to task for it by successive auditors general. If you don't have your own numbers straight in your own head, you're not likely to do very well in terms of either explaining it to your political masses or certainly not to explaining it to the public.
All right, we'll leave it at that for this week. Good to see you all, Andrew and Chantal. Of course, and Althea, thanks for joining us this week.